You ever have one of those moments when you realize you might have just bought yourself way more trouble than you bargained for? I mean, I always thought the scariest thing I'd face after leaving Silicon Valley was maybe a raccoon in the trash or a busted pipe, not a pack of neighbors in pressed polos with legal pads. But that's life, right? Never lets you get too comfortable. So picture this. Me, Jack Heron, just pushing 50, burnout from 2 decades wrangling startups, finally cashing out enough to grab a chunk of land. 5 rolling acres just outside Willow Creek. This place people called upscale, with its big iron gates, tall pines, and houses that all looked like the same architect copy-pasted the blueprints. I thought I'd found heaven. It was supposed to be peace. Maybe start a little wood shop, fire up the grill, let my nephew Ethan run wild with his dirt bike out back. Just a guy with his tools, his dreams, and maybe a few less emails. First week, I'm not even unpacked, and my mailbox looks like it's trying to break a world record, stuffed with envelopes from the Willow Creek Estates HOA. I figure, okay, probably just boring welcome packets, right? Nope. I start flipping them open and the mood goes sour fast. Notice of fine. Gravel path not up to standard. Violation. Barn door color out of compliance. Immediate attention required. Fence line visible from main road. $50 here, $100 there, and by week's end, it's closing in on $1,000. All for things that, if you ask me, only a control freak would even notice. I tried to laugh it off, but it stung. I'd moved way out here thinking I was leaving that city grind, the corporate nonsense, the constant need to please people who wouldn't recognize me in a crowd. But suddenly, it's like I've traded one boardroom for another. Except these guys wear loafers instead of suits, and their power comes from bylaws, not budgets. Every letter felt personal, like someone had circled my name with a red pen and said, "This guy doesn't fit." At night, I'd sit at my battered kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork and half-empty mugs, venting to Tom Riley, my best friend since college, the sort of guy who's steady as a rock but doesn't sugarcoat. He'd squint at the latest HOA threat, blow out his cheeks, and mutter, "Jack, these people want you gone. They're betting you'll sell, take the loss, just to get your weekends back. That's how bullies work." And maybe he was right, but I'm stubborn. I grew up with a dad who'd stare down tornadoes if it meant keeping his dignity. So I started digging. I read every bylaw, every rule, even called the county clerk. Meanwhile, the letters kept coming, and the fines ballooned from hundreds to thousands. By mid-spring, they were demanding $250,000, which, I mean, are you kidding me? For the aesthetic crime of having a gray barn door and letting my porch light stay on past 9 p.m.? That's when the social stuff kicked in, and if you've never felt a whole neighborhood's eyes on you, let me tell you, it's like carrying a heavy pack you can't set down. People at the diner would go quiet when I walked in. Kids stopped waving when I drove by. Old Hank Miller at the gas pump started giving me this stink eye, muttering, "Rules are rules, son. Don't like it, move out." Others just avoided me altogether, like trouble was contagious. But there was one thing nobody counted on. I don't like being pushed. I got quiet, sure, but inside, a fire was smoldering. I started keeping records. I watched the board meetings online. Victor Lang, the HOA president, loved to play king of the castle, strutting around in golf shirts, always talking about protecting property values. He painted me as some outsider, this city guy dragging down their perfect little world. His sidekick, Sarah Clean, the accountant, would nod and clutch her binder like a shield. What really got me was the little things. Like, Victor would stand at those meetings talking about community spirit, but then he'd push for more security cameras, more rules, more fences. Meanwhile, Tom kept telling me to fight, and Ethan, who'd started helping me around the property, just laughed at the latest fines, saying, "Uncle Jack, these folks need a hobby." The twist, though? It didn't come from a yelling match or a thrown punch. It came from a random night when insomnia had me up late, digging through digital records for some loophole to throw back at them. That's when I stumbled onto something weird, a document from an old real estate deal, signed back when I was still knee-deep in flips and tax shelters. Turns out, through a little holding company, I actually owned the land beneath half of Willow Creek Estates. Not their houses, but the ground, thanks to some Byzantine subdivision arrangement no one had untangled in decades. I sat there at 2 a.m., just staring at the screen, and all I could think was, no way. This is a movie plot, right? But it was real. All those fines, all that arrogance, and all this time, they'd been squatting on my dirt. Let me paint the scene. Next board meeting, fluorescent lights humming. A dozen neighbors lined up like a firing squad. I walk in, folder in hand, and Victor smirks like he's about to watch me beg. Instead, I slide the deed across the table and say, "You guys keep threatening me with your rules, but the truth is, your power stops at those gates. In fact, you're standing on my land." Dead silence. Sarah almost dropped her coffee. Victor's face went purple, but he tried to keep it together. "Mr. Heron, our HOA is recognized by the county. These bylaws apply to all adjacent properties." I just shook my head. "You want to take this to court? Let's see how that works out for you." Now, you'd think maybe they'd back off, but egos that big don't go quietly. Instead, they hit me with a lawsuit, demanding the full amount, legal fees, you name it. It was a final power play. Tom sent me a text. They're digging their own grave. Ethan found it hilarious, reading the papers and whistling. "Uncle Jack, they're charging you for the air you breathe now." At this point, the whole town was buzzing. Some people, like old Mrs. Elena Ruiz, started whispering that maybe the board had overreached. But the loudest voices, folks like Hank, were just mad. "Who do you think you are, Heron? Nobody's above the rules. But rules only work when they're fair." I hired Mia Torres, a lawyer with a smile like a knife and the patience of a saint. We walked into court, the place packed. Their attorney, Derek Voss, tried to frame me as the threat. If this man ignores our standards, it puts all our investments at risk. Victor and Sarah sat up front, beaming. Mia didn't even blink. She handed the judge my deed and said, "Your Honor, my client owns the land beneath their feet. The HOA's rules have no power here." You could hear the air get sucked out of the room. The judge, a tough old lady named Elena Vargas, adjusted her glasses and asked, "Is this true?" Mia nodded. "Cool as you like." "Yes, ma'am. They've been levying fines on someone who holds their foundation in his hand." It took a minute, but you could see the realization spread. Victor's confidence cracked. Sarah went white. The judge called for a recess, and out in the hallway, chaos broke out. Neighbors crowded in, demanding answers. Victor barked at his lawyer. Sarah ducked out, fighting tears. Tom found me and just started laughing. "Jack, you flipped the whole board upside down." Back in Willow Creek, the fallout was like a bomb going off. Suddenly, the board couldn't enforce anything. Meetings turned into finger-pointing contests. Folks who'd once avoided me started coming by, like the young couple down the lane, nervous, holding their toddler, asking if they'd lose their home. I told them the truth. "I'm not here to wreck your life. I just want to be left alone. Nobody should live under a threat for how they trim their hedges." The local news picked up the story. HOA fines man $250,000, learns he owns their land. It went viral. Reddit dubbed me the land baron of Willow Creek. I became a meme, half hero, half villain. Some people said I was fighting the good fight for every little guy who's ever been steamrolled by a board. Others claimed I was about to jack up rents, become a slumlord. I kept my head down. But that spotlight, man, it's a weird feeling. Strangers showed up wanting to shake my hand. Others drove by slow, glaring. What really mattered to me were the faces that started coming around. Mrs. Ruiz, who baked me a pie. The older guys from the diner, finally nodding again. Even Hank, though he'd never admit it, seemed a little less angry. As for the board, Victor resigned, quietly and quickly. Sarah faded into the background. Dues dried up. The HOA's power shrank overnight, and the community, fractured for months, started finding its way back. Some people moved out, scared by the uncertainty, but others stayed, talking openly for the first time in years. Me? I went back to my shop, dusted off my tools, and built a new workbench with the biggest window I could manage. There's something about that first sunrise with no threat hanging over your head. I thought I'd feel triumph, but mostly it was relief, and this weird kind of sadness for all the time wasted on fights that never needed to happen. Looking back, the lesson hits hard. Sometimes the biggest battles aren't about winning or losing, but just refusing to get pushed around. Neighborhoods are supposed to be places where people look out for each other, not hunt each other over shrub heights or paint colors. But fear, comfort, and a little power? They twist things up fast. I'll be honest, though, sometimes I wonder if I waited too long to play my hand. Maybe I should have called their bluff sooner, spared everyone months of stress. Or maybe it had to go down this way, so folks could see what happens when a community trades trust for control. What about you? Is this what justice looks like? Or just another chapter in the endless saga of neighbors and their petty wars? Let me know in the comments. Have you ever tangled with an HOA that forgot who it was supposed to serve? Where's the line between keeping order and just running roughshod over people's lives? I want to hear your take. Right, wrong, somewhere in between. And hey, if this story hit home, stick around. You never know what kind of drama's brewing right behind those white picket fences. Thanks for sticking with me. Stay sharp out there. And don't let anyone tell you where your boundaries end.